for another episode of the Cozy Corner of Cinema. This is episode number 204, being recorded on Friday, February 27th, 2026, on a beautiful morning. The sun is out, the whole landscape is just painted with snow. The cats are enjoying themselves in the window. We got this one here watching birds on the TV, so if you occasionally hear some birds in the background, that's what it is. I hope you all are doing extremely well on your own artistic endeavors, whether it be your filmmaking or your writing or your composing or whatever it is that you need to get done. Whatever it is in your artistic endeavors, in your personal life, just staying true to yourself and staying consistent, not being passive in your own life, not letting people kind of dictate your days for you and what to do, being put in a situation that you don't want to be in if you have the ability to not be in it. The days are still quite cold, but not as egregious as before, and it's just great at the end of the day to get under the blanket, put on a film or two, or read a book, or, I try not to do too much writing after a certain point. Writing is one of these things where it kind of comes in bolts throughout the day, where I just get this incredible wave of inspiration and thought, and then other times I'm sitting there just struggling to get something out that I think will stay on the paper. So, it's all just about, being consistent to the work, being consistent to the process, however that is. Everyone's got their own kind of workflow and their own sort of rituals and things they have to do. So I just hope you're finding your own, and I hope that you are staying consistent with yourself, not to repeat myself. I got a hot cup of coffee right here. The cat is enjoying watching the bird on TV. It's like her own personal IMAX, and maybe we'll talk about the IMAX a little bit later if I get to it. But let me get a sip of this coffee, and we're going to talk about some films. This is the Cozy Corner of Cinema, after all, so thank you for lending me your ears for however long you decide to listen to, whether it be for a couple seconds, a few minutes, or maybe even the whole thing. I really appreciate you taking the time and taking the chance to click on this, and I'm going to try not to waste it if I can. So let me get a sip of this. We're going to talk about some films. All right. So recently I was seeing online some controversy, maybe not even controversy, some strong opinions, I should say, positively or negatively, about some of Criterion's upcoming releases to Netflix distributed films, or Netflix, Netflix released films. These are actually, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're films from Netflix, one of which was the recent Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I've talked about that on the Best Picture nominees episode with my girlfriend, so you can listen to that if you want to hear my opinions on that film. And I think which garnered more of a reaction, is the recent K-Pop Demon Hunters film, which it was a Netflix film. It was a huge critical success, nominated for multiple Academy Awards. It released theatrically for, I think, a weekend twice. And although Netflix does not release their numbers, the speculations were pouring through that I think it made something like 30 million or some number like that. I mean, I was looking at, sometimes when I look at the show times and they have the reserved seatings, I like to kind of gauge what is drawing in people. And a few of the times I looked, I mean, those theaters had plenty of gray seats, and gray means occupied. So I haven't seen the film. It wasn't really a priority to me. I haven't had it directly recommended, but acquaintances of mine whose opinions that I take seriously, they were a fan of the film. They liked it quite a bit, but ultimately it just wasn't really something that I was too interested in watching. A title like this wouldn't be one that I would have assumed would get a Criterion release, but the way I look at this is that it's most likely going to sell well, and in turn that'll give them the finances to release other films that maybe they know will not sell as well, but importantly, make available. And that's the same thing with this K-pop Demon Hunters. The fact that it's getting a physical release at all is a good thing. Same thing with Frankenstein. And I talked about how much I wasn't a fan of Frankenstein, but it's good to not see these films stranded on a streaming service. And I think part of the frustration, I think, with Criterion acquiring some of these Netflix titles is a frustration in the lack thereof and some of their choices. I have no issue with either of these films being released physically, but it makes me wonder just the amount of films, the amount of just exceptional Netflix films that are still stuck on streaming. Now, of course, there are alternatives. I don't have Netflix. My girlfriend does. And if she gets rid of Netflix, I will not pay for it. There's little to nothing on Netflix I'm interested in terms of their originals. I am not interested in browsing. I'm not doing any of that. But in terms of their original films I have seen, you could buy a bootleg of them from an online seller, or you can watch them another unauthorized way, so to speak. But it's more about these films, these really quality films, that I think are going to get lost on this service. They're going to get lost on any kind of streaming service because you'll have these films that are pushed to the front for a period of time, and then they almost kind of become disposable. I think of maybe something I watched this year, the movie The Rip, the Joe Carnahan film with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Enjoyable action film, enjoyable crime film. I thought it was, I would have seen it theatrically if it was released, but for about a week or two, or maybe even more, it gets pushed to the front. Netflix exclusive, new Ben Affleck, Matt Damon film. People talk about it, and then after that, even if, let's say, it's really good, let's say it's amazing, in fact, which I think the general consensus that I saw was it was pretty good. Pretty good to good, which is kind of where I'm at. It was pretty good. I enjoyed it. But then after that period of time, it's like, well, then it gets pushed away. Maybe it occasionally pops up if you decide to browse, which, if you're someone like me, I'm absolutely not browsing. Then it gets gone. Then it is thrown to the side. And then you go, oh yeah, maybe in years, maybe you come across it and it gets recommended and you go, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, they made a Netflix exclusive film? Like, I didn't ever even heard of this. And that's what happens. It gets lost to streaming. I'm thinking about these some of my favorite Netflix originals. Dolemite Is My Name. The latest from Larry Karaszewski and Scott Alexander, from 2019, a hilarious, heartfelt look at Rudy Ray Moore and the production of Dolemite. One of these notorious kind of cult films, but it's just such an exceptional film. I watched it again recently, a couple years ago, maybe even last year, actually, with my girlfriend. It had to be last year, actually, and it was just, man, it almost made me well up at a certain point. I thought it was so heartfelt and fantastic. Or another film that I straight up love, which is The Other Side of the Wind by Orson Welles. It released posthumously, edited by Bob Murawski from Grindhouse Releasing, who actually is just in the news because he just edited Sam Raimi's new film, Send Help, which is doing very well financially, so that is great to see. People really respond to that film. I wasn't particularly a fan of the film, but hey, you know what? Bob Murawski is a quality editor. Sam Raimi is a quality filmmaker, so that's great to see. But The Other Side of the Wind, this was talked about for decades and decades. It gets released in 2018, and then what happens? It comes and goes. I mean, this is a new posthumously released Orson Welles film, and you can speculate how much of it was originally his. That's a whole other conversation. I would actually recommend the documentary as well, They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. And I believe there's actually a book as well about the making of The Other Side of the Wind, and it's it being unavailable for decades. But, I mean, Orson Welles, who fits better on Criterion's line? I mean, we have films of his like Citizen Kane, F for Fake, these are great Magnificent Ambersons, these great Orson Welles films, and this belongs in the Pantheon as well. And at this point, I'm kind of just naming films that I think should be released as well to Criterion. Let me get a sip of this coffee here. And another film, was it 22? I think it came out? Yeah, 2022. Controversially, a very controversial film that year, which is Andrew Dominik's Blonde with Ana de Armas, which I thought was just one of the most exceptional films of the year. That unfortunately was just released at a really poor time. We're in an age of very hyperbolic, very reactionary opinions on a film. And when I say that, I mean not necessarily just strongly liking it or strongly disliking it, but these very absurd, very exaggerated opinions on the film. And I think, unfortunately, that kind of overshadowed the quality of the film itself. Andrew Dominik's a filmmaker who has yet to make anything I don't think is great. And it seems like, funnily enough, all of his films, with the exception of Chopper, has kind of been released at a maybe not the strongest, or really wasn't appreciated, I would say, so much when it was released. I mean, Chopper, it's Eric Bana, I believe that's 2000. Then in 2007, he releases The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. In an already impressive year, 2007 is one of the strongest years for films in general. When you're releasing heavy hitters like, of course, No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, Zodiac, Gone Baby Gone. Yes, these really, really exceptional films. I know Gone Baby Gone isn't, I don't think is as strong as other ones, but I'm saying, like, a really exceptional, like any of these films could be Best Picture in any other year. And then you have The Assassination of Jesse James, which I remember even when it came out, when I would have been too young to have appreciated it. People talked about, oh, it's long, it's almost 3 hours, it's long dialogue scenes, it's boring. I kept hearing that it's so boring. I didn't see it till years later, and I was taken aback by how much I was invested in that film. Such an incredibly mature and intelligent film that was just overshadowed by these other great films. And unfortunately, now that we're getting these longer films now, and I'm not even just talking about films like The Brutalist, which can come in at 3.5 hours, but even look at like the last Mission Impossibles or like The Avengers or these big studio, movies that can push 3 hours, or even like Avatar, Fire and Ash, which is over 3 hours, and they make hundreds of millions of dollars. I think now that if this film was released wide, it would have found more of its footing. And then Killing Them Softly. Now I'm just going off an extra. Killing Them Softly in 2012, kind of famously was. I thought bizarrely overbashed when it was released. I didn't see the film theatrically. I saw it later on, but it got a lot of talk. People were saying it was bad. It famously was one of the few films to receive an F rating from CinemaScore, which I think is insane to me. I mean, oh my, that's wild if you ask me. And Killing Them Softly is such a the word is overused, but a timely, comical, dark, violent film. It's a reflection of sort of America at that point, but in a very, very well done way. One of the things I always remember about the film is the ending. There's like one last kind of monologue that really ties the film up in a nice bow, and the final line of the film before it hard cuts to the credits is just like, it makes the hairs on your arm stand. And I just think that's insane. I mean, that CinemaScore, I think they also gave Darren Aronofsky's Mother an F, which is just ridiculous. It's like, it's one thing to not like the film. I've got no problems with that. But with the amount of just bad films that get released every year, I mean, a film like Mother or Killing Them Softly, are these really the worst films of the year? And I just don't think so. There's too much artistry, there's too much craft, where even if I wasn't a fan of these, I could still say, well, okay, these are exceptionally acted. Or in Mother's case, the editing is just so good in that film. But it's all subjective. Anyways, Killing Them Softly, I think, has also been kind of lost. And then Blonde. Blonde, I think, was just unfairly maligned. It's just such a well put together, just a haunting film that has incredibly upsetting content in it. But it's a film with just so much more going on than people, I think, were seeing at a surface level. And it sort of became like not even necessarily the butt of the joke, but it became this sort of thing of just people. I mean, this was around the time when I really had to kind of stop reading some of the internet stuff, because it's one thing if I have an acquaintance who maybe feels strongly against a film that I like, or vice versa. I had acquaintances. I've talked about how much I'm a fan of 28 Years Later. I had acquaintances who said it was terrible. It was, and that's fine. They're my acquaintances. I have context for their opinions. I don't care about that. If Joe Schmo online is saying it's terrible, I gotta go. Who are you? I have no idea who you are. I have no idea what your background is. So I have no idea. I have no problem if an acquaintance strongly disagrees with the film. If they're an acquaintance, that means I want to, I want to hear their opinion. But just some of the reactions I was hearing about it was just so over the top. It was so hyperbolic. It was so immature that I just thought, man, I can't even look at this anymore. So I think a film like this to receive a Criterion would be exceptional. And I think that unfortunately it will take time before this could find its footing, and hopefully it does, because this really is one of the strongest films of the, not even, not even of just the 2020s. I think it's one of the strongest films of the 21st century so far. And I would love to see it get a new release. But the point is, though, is that with Criterion releasing some of these Netflix films, some of their choices, I mean, it's all subjective. It is all, like one film over the other. I understand some titles, like The Irishman, except a Scorsese film, I get it, which they actually released one of his other Netflix films, which was that Bob Dylan Rolling Thunder Review documentary, which was actually pretty good. And I actually wonder why, I never got an answer, but I wonder why Killers of the Flower Moon was distributed by Apple and not Netflix. And actually, funnily enough, that's getting a Criterion release as well, after Apple had previously turned down Criterion for a release. But Del Toro had Pinocchio, which was a Netflix film, and there's been other stuff like Marriage Story, and what else got released by Criterion? I gotta look here because I can only think of a couple off the top of my head. The Power of the Dog was one. I don't totally know or remember, but even, I don't know. I don't know. It's just more so about films being lost on streaming, films that, like I'm talking about with something like The Rip, which is like these contemporary sort of film of the moment, and then they get tossed away to the side. And I think when you're stuck on a streaming service, Joe Schmo, who is not going to do any kind of deep digging, they're going to go for the film of the moment, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's just like, by sticking them, by stranding them on a streaming service, it almost makes these films disposable, of just regardless of how good they are, or even how okay they are, or whatever. They just get lost in the shuffle, and you pop up and you go, what even is this? So, I'm hoping that with the releases of KPop Demon Hunters and Frankenstein, they sell well. Criterion will have more of an incentive to release these Netflix films, because there's just too many quality ones that are just stuck on there now. And I think a new release will breathe new life into a lot of these films, especially in the case of something like Blonde, which I think will, now that time has passed and the fake kind of hyperbolic outrage is past, that it can find new life and be appreciated in a new context, in a way that you see so many films. Like, it's just funny. I recently watched a documentary on Michael Cimino, and there's a whole point about protesting The Deer Hunter and how this film is inaccurate and it's racist and this and that. And they even have, I don't remember if it was in the film or not, but reading in the Cimino book of Jane Fonda blasting Michael Cimino at the Oscars, saying, "Your film is racist, your film is awful." And Cimino asking, "Well, have you seen the film?" And she says, "Of course not." And then here we are now in 2026. The Deer Hunter is one of the great 20th century works. But with that said, let me see here. Speaking of films on physical, I've been on a weird kind of kick of some of HBO's documentaries lately. I had watched a couple recently. I watched one the other night, which I was profoundly affected by, it's called Jim, the James Foley story. A documentary about war journalist James Foley, who at the start of the film we find out was captured and publicly executed by ISIS, with his execution video being released on the internet. And the film follows his life. It follows him as a war journalist. It doesn't sugarcoat a lot of it. I mean, I think the film does make a good point these preventable situations when people are telling him not to do this, not to go somewhere. It's a really, really heartfelt and touching film that I was just profoundly affected by. The second half of it, there's this whole other part where these other people come in and they talk about this place that they were in with him, which I thought was just so gut wrenching. It was just such a well done documentary. I loved it. One of my favorite films I've seen this year. But even talking about something like My Mom Jane, which was one of my favorite films of 2025, I'm thinking these films again. They're stuck on HBO, and I think what's even more disheartening than these, because at least at the very, because they're on HBO Max or whatever they call it now for the time being. So you can go on there and you can watch. I've talked about the Life of Crime trilogy, which is just one of, I've talked about that years ago on the show, and how even to this day those films still affect me. I still think about them, and how just powerful those films were. I would buy those physically, but the older HBO documentaries, I'm looking and I'm thinking about, okay, I've talked about ones like Small Town Ecstasy, about the father who was addicted to going to raves and taking ecstasy and not really taking care of his kids. It's a very good documentary, very upsetting, but really well done. But then I think of like some of the older ones. I was talking about the one that, oh boy, what was it called? I talked about it for 1993. It was one of the films I watched that year. It was boy, I might have to actually pause this because I want to find the name of it. So bear with me for one moment. I found it. It was I Am a Promise, The Children of Stanton Elementary School. This was from 1993, and a very well done documentary looking at following a handful of kids and these teachers in this inner city Philadelphia school. Very well done. It has a DVD, but I had to, couldn't find it anywhere. Thankfully, the library had it. I had to actually order it from the library, and it was only on a disc. Didn't even have a case for it. And I'm thinking about this film and Small Town Ecstasy, and I'm thinking the amount of HBO documentaries that are just unavailable without doing some searching is insane to me. Because it's not even as if they're available on HBO Max. They're just not available, period, without doing your own kind of digging on it. Or even something like, what was it called? I think it was if any of you have seen The Fighter, with Mark Wahlberg and Christian Bale. There's a part in that film where they're making a documentary about Christian Bale, who's getting his it's based on a true story, and he's getting high, and he's smoking crack in Lowell, Massachusetts. I think it was called like something on Crack Street or something like that. It was an HBO documentary, and it's just not available. And I remember like watching part of that on YouTube, and I'm like, why isn't this? They just made this film, The Fighter, in 2010. Why is this not, easily accessible? And that's what I've talked about before with streaming. I'm not saying, I'm not somebody who just buys everything. I like to, I'm considering myself more of a curating my collection rather than just collecting everything. But like these documentaries, I would like to own these. Last week talking about the Frederick Wiseman documentaries, I would love to own these. The idea of films being so disposable and being stuck on a server until somebody or some company or some entity decides that we can't have these films anymore, or there's a rights issue and they're gone, or God forbid they censor stuff out of it. I mean, you hear stories all the time about film streaming that gets censored, or scenes get removed or changes and that. Or maybe the filmmaker says, what, actually I want to rearrange, I want to re-edit my film, and I want that version on streaming. And you go, wait, what happened in the original version? These edits that you made, these are detriments. And that's what I'm talking about. A lot of these companies, unless they get picked up by a boutique, label like a Criterion, because Criterion have also released Amazon films as well. They've released like Sound of Metal, One Night in Miami, Nanny. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I think Nanny was Amazon. It doesn't matter. Either way, you get what I'm saying. But yeah, unless you have these labels, and then what happens to them? Let's say if Criterion suddenly they can't release films physically anymore for whatever reason, then what happens to these films? It's almost like a wasteland of all of these films, just instead of like rubble. it's like films on films on films. Like, wait, what happened to this film from 20 years ago? What happened to this film? And so that's great to have companies now who, or maybe not even now necessarily, but it's not a brand new thing, but you hear stories about these companies who restore these previously lost films, or these like 70s 80s films. You have companies like Something Weird. People, they were throwing these films away. They were just like, well, like, oh, this is an hour of just this random weird thing, let's just throw it away, who's going to want to see this? And they save them from the depths, and even if they're not good, it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is that they're not lost. They're not lost media anymore. And when when you're without these companies, these films are abandoned. And so I can tell you, hey, check out this documentary, I Am a Promise: The Children Stand in Elementary School, or Small Town Ecstasy. That unless it's like even a huge film, unless it's like something like Paradise Lost or something, where get big Academy Award attention, all that. But even recently, I mean, look at HBO. They one of their documentaries, The Alabama Solution, is nominated for Best Documentary Feature. Is that going to get a physical? I mean, who knows? Probably not. Is Criterion going to pick it up? I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. But without repeating myself, I think it is just important to just be aware, I guess, that streaming and digital is just so, what's the word I'm looking for? It is just so fragile. And films and media or music, or like, so I'm not even just talking about buying films, and I'm not just saying just buy, just buy as much as you can. I'm not saying that. I'm saying just being aware that films or music or literature, having something physical, having something analog about it. I mean, I know we're talking about like Blu-rays, but like I'm talking about buying like a vinyl record of like an album next, that people aren't talking about, or a book that no one, that hasn't, there's no PDF for it, or anything like that. It's just so important to kind of keep these in the general discussion, and to recommend them to people, and to get recommendations, and all the sorts. But I'm kind of repeating myself now, so I'm not going to just circle the corner. But anyways, yeah, I just wanted to kind of mention some of that stuff. The Criterion announcements for those. It was a double-edged sword in terms of possibility, and also in terms of unreliability. But we'll see how it plays out. Hopefully I am proven wrong, and many of these films get released. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyways, the cat is jumping around there. The other cat is kind of asleep. Well, no, he's awake now. And I don't know, the other cat is somewhere over there. But that'll do it for this episode. It is a nice sunny day out. We have a whole day ahead of us, and we're going to use it wisely. Well, at least I'm going to use it wisely. You can do whatever you want to do. It's your life, and as long as you're not hurting yourself or anybody else, I don't have any kind of place to tell you how to live it. So enjoy your rest of your day or your night whenever you listen to this. Keep an eye out on films, on literature, on music. Just keep the train going, man. Be consistent and be true to yourself. And that is all I have to say for this episode. So thank you so much for listening. And I still have nothing to end these episodes on. No kind of quip or no kind of funny note. So I'm not going to even say anything. I'm going to just cut it like this.